Today's topic is visualization. Now, many of you have probably heard of visualization when it comes to your favorite sports stars, Tiger Woods, Tom Brady. We picture them visualizing the win before it happens. But I want to talk about how visualization can work for you in a really simple, understandable way that you can use every day as a new tool in your tool set of being a creative. Now, what is the definition of visualization? To me, the definition of visualization is using your sort of mental capacity to experience something in the future that you've yet to experience in real life. Now, there's a fine line between visualization and fantasy, and we're going to talk about that a little bit, but I want to sort of demystify and make this concept of visualization less of something that's scary for you to try out for yourself or to test out. Now, the brain doesn't really understand the difference between something that's happening in real life and something that's happening in your head. And that is kind of the key understanding point for visualization. If I told you right now to think of an elephant and think of a circus tent, immediately in your mind, you're gonna conjure up those images. It's almost impossible for those things not to happen when I bring up those words. And those images appear in your mental field. In some way, they almost overlay into your experience of the world. Like if you're looking at the room, suddenly sort of an elephant or a circus tent are sort of present in your mental field. And what's really interesting is if I told you, think about one of your favorite birthday parties when you were a kid, or a birthday cake that you had, or think about that playground that you used to go to when you were in elementary school. That memory, that idea that you have somewhere in your, back in your brain, in your memory, it isn't that different than something you can imagine in the future. So if I told you to start imagining in the future going out for ice cream and picking your favorite ice cream place and what that would feel like, and maybe how you'd order at the counter, and maybe that first lick of a new ice cream cone, that imagination that you had for this future event doesn't feel that different than the memory that you have of a past event. So in your mind, there's not too much of a difference between the past and the future, and that is very powerful. Now, when you're a kid, we imagine things all the time, right? We're constantly playing, imagining, fantasizing, but for some reason as adults, we tend to lose that skill or ability. And there's a plus side to that and a minus side to that. So the plus side of no longer spending all of our time fantasizing is a lot of those things we pretended as a kid were just simply not true. They were fantasies, and they weren't realistic in the sense that, we might imagine that we were flying or doing all these things that we're not actually capable of doing. Now, the downside of no longer using the skill of imagination and visualization is that now that you are an adult, you can bring imagination and visualization into your life in a way that doesn't overlap with fantasy. Because when we're adults, we have a lot better understanding of how to guide ourselves in the world, how to control our mental states, how to understand what's fantasy and what's real in our heads. And so the visualization that you'll do as an adult is going to be much more controlled and much more purposeful and much more realistic in a certain sense than the visualization you might do as a child when you just had a full open imagination. So it's kind of a downside and an upside to this reduction in how much we use our imagination. But being able to imagine something in the future, now that is a superpower. Why? Because as I described earlier, the difference between your future thinking and your memories is not so different. And when we're trying to learn a skill or we're trying to do something new that we've never done before, you can actually practice that in your head prior to doing that. And the act of practicing it in your head before you do that is going to make you more comfortable in the actual moment when you need to do that itself. Using that control as an adult to practice things in advance is a huge advantage, because you can create this safe space for yourself to try something new, to try on something new, to act out the way that you would like to act before you actually go do that. And that's why sports stars will, practice their putt in their mind. A famous snowboarder will imagine the perfect run in their mind over and over again. And because your brain thinks that could be a memory, it starts to normalize that event for you and make it much easier for that to actually occur when you're doing it. You've got cues to go off of. You're not just trying something new for the absolute first time. In some sense, you've already experienced it, which makes it easier for you to actually do in real life. So you can think of visualization and imagination as a free way to get repetitions into anything that you want to learn, as a free way to practice having that conversation that scares you, as a free, safe, you can't lose, can't fail way to do something you're scared to do first before you do it in the real world. So now that I've kind of broken down why I think it's important to use this tool, we all have an incredible tool. You've got a supercomputer in your brain that lets you test out things in advance in a way that's going to make it easier for you in the future. A virtual space you can go to that's safe, that you can't fail in. That is an incredible tool. So let's talk about some simple things to understand and think about when it comes to using this tool. Now I have a few tips for you for visualization. The first one is when you start to visualize something, start with being and visualizing the most comfortable space you can be in. I like to think about being at the beach or being in a cozy cabin, but think about a space that feels very comfortable to you and place yourself there when you begin. Now, the reason for doing that is it's going to make it a lot more natural and comfortable, and you'll be a lot more confident when you're doing the visualization. So start with somewhere that feels really comfortable for you, flip through in your mind until you find a space, like I said, like a cabin or somewhere that just feels really warm and sort of cozy. The second tip for visualizing or learning to visualize is recognize that the rules don't apply. This imagination you have in your mind, you can do whatever you want with it. Now, we talked about keeping things away from fantasy, and I do think that when you're practicing something mentally, you want to make it as realistic as possible. But if you want to learn something really interesting, you can play around with the space a little bit. You could be sitting in a cozy cabin, and you could have yourself at a younger age or older age walk through the door and have a conversation with yourself. You could bring things into that space that are non-existent in the laws of gravity or reality to aid the practice process. That's what you want to do. And so maybe when you go off the ramp, because you're practicing visualizing the skateboarding move, maybe picture, this release of tension happening and the sun coming out when you launch off the ramp, and it's this positive thing, not the scary thing that you have right now in your mind. So use the space in a creative way to aid in the practice that you have. Now, the third one, and this is really fascinating, is notice objects that appear in the space, maybe on their own. So, like a dream, like the dreams that we have, the objects that we identify in these imaginative spaces might have symbolic value. And there's something else you can pay attention to around that, is how large or small are these objects? You say, yes, I'm in this cozy space, the sun's out, and I have this huge wooden desk in front of me. Now, I like to reflect on some of those visualizations and things that sort of show up like that, because how close is it to you? How big is it? How small? Those actually give you a little bit of clues to dissect and understand a visualization. And I'll talk about that, I think, in a future video, because it's an interesting topic. Tip number 4 is bring more senses into the space. If you're in the cozy cabin, hear the fire that's crackling. Hear the window, have rain on it and some wind coming in and out. Touch the pillowcase that's really soft kind of in your hands. Use your senses to bring yourself more presently there. Dial them up so that you're as present as possible in this visualized space for the conversation that you're about to have, for the putt you're about to make, for the pitch you're about to do. Just be very aware and make it as realistic as possible using all of your senses. And the last tip I have for you around visualization is to be your own guide. And that's a really fun and interesting part of this as well. You get to run through that imaginary scenario as many times as you'd like. You get to create the aspects of the room. You get to play out the situation in different ways however you'd like it to happen. You are the guide, and nobody can take that away from you. And I'm reminded about John McCain being a prisoner of war in Vietnam, and when he was asked about that experience and getting through years of being a prisoner of war, he said that he played golf in his mind. So even though he was in this terrible situation, he was using his mental capacity to imagine himself playing rounds of golf. And that's really powerful. So I want everybody who's listening just to consider or think about this amazing tool that maybe you thought was only for the Olympic athletes or only for people who are crazy, I suppose. And remember that you've already been somebody who's used your imagination your entire life. You've already had all the childhood times of playing and imagining and visualizing and fantasizing. This isn't something that's weird. It's something that's very human, and it's something that's very helpful if you can just embrace the idea and try it out. So if you have any questions, let me know in the comments. If you try it out and you want to share, leave that in the comments too, and I'd be happy to discuss that with you. And I'll be back again soon. Thanks.